Perhaps you've noticed there's a lot going on in the world right now. In a few minutes, we'll join together in the prayers of the people. We'll pray for those affected by the earthquake in Haiti, the turmoil in Afghanistan, the COVID pandemic, and the hurricane currently approaching New Orleans. We put words to these prayers not because God doesn't already know the need, but because we ourselves need to remember. We need to name the things that weigh on our hearts. You probably have prayers of your own, concerns that weigh particularly on you. In my own prayers, I'll remember teachers and school administrators, parents and caregivers, doctors and nurses, first responders, government officials, my fellow clergy, and so many more. All those who bear responsibility without certainty, all those acting with whatever faith they can muster in the face of exhaustion and frustration and difficulties that seem to multiply day after day. I'll remember those I've been asked to pray for, those facing medical and financial challenges, those who are alone. There's a lot going on. It gives me some comfort to remember that this isn't the first time in history when those words could be said. That's part of the wisdom of the passage from Deuteronomy that we just heard. Remember. Remember. Remember the things your eyes have seen. Make them known to your children and your children's children. Remember the hard times, but also remember that God was with you through them, that God is with you still. Remember that your story is God's story. It gives me some comfort to recall that the cry, "How long, O Lord, how long?" is a cry of desperation, but also a cry of faith, a cry that assumes an answer, an end, a cry that holds within it a promise that weeping may spend the night, but joy comes in the morning. It gives me some comfort, but still, there's a lot going on. Today, now, and we're all affected by it. Even those who aren't struggling right now have to put up with the short tempers and frustration of those who are. I'm sure you've heard the stories or witnessed them yourselves. Airline passengers shouting at flight attendants, fights breaking out in school board meetings, nasty looks in the grocery store aisle, road rage, arguments among friends and within families. There's a lot going on, and anger seems to be a common reaction. The letter of James tells us we ought to be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to anger, for our anger does not produce God's righteousness. Be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to anger. That's easy to say, harder to do. I would guess that most of us here are not the ones screaming and shouting in public, storming out of stores or restaurants or meetings in a rage. Although a few of us might have come close, we might have had our moments. I know that I get angry these days more frequently than I ever have before. My temper is short. People annoy me. I try to keep my cool, but I'm a little bit cranky a lot of the time. And I don't think I'm alone in that. How do we follow James's advice to be slow to anger in times like these? And can being slow to anger really do any good? Being slow to anger doesn't mean abandoning your principles. It doesn't mean pretending that right and wrong are one and the same. But it does mean trying time and again to act and to speak from a place of love. Talk about love can sometimes sound like sentimentality. There's an old story about a preacher's kid who was asked to summarize a Sunday sermon that she'd heard. "It was the same as always," the girl said. "Blah, blah, 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 love. Blah, 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 love." There's some truth to it. But there's a reason we talk so much about love in the church. It has to do with the model that Jesus set for us, the path he taught us to follow. When Jesus faced peril and pain and betrayal, he didn't get angry. Instead, he gathered with his friends, he washed their feet, he shared a meal, and he gave them a new commandment: love one another, he said. There was nothing sentimental about Jesus' kind of love. It was a love that was outward-focused, self-giving. Jesus' kind of love is perhaps the only thing that can cut through anger and fear, our own and the anger and fear of those we meet. The faithful way to confront anger is with love, with the knowledge that we and the people we're in conflict with were created in the image of God. To focus on what we can do, to care for the widow and the orphan, as the letter from James urges us, to care for those in need. And how powerful that sort of love can be. I read a story the other day about a teenage boy named Samuel, who had been in and out of foster homes for all of his life. He was angry, so angry, at his parents, at the system, at all the people who had abused and abandoned him. He had one friend, a girl named Jenny, who he'd met on the school bus. He'd never met her family, never been to her home, but she was the only person he could talk to. Their friendship gave him just a little bit of hope. But then he was kicked out of his 7th foster placement, and he knew he'd have to move back to a shelter. He knew he'd lose even this one friendship. He told Jenny what had happened. And about a week later, he called her at home. Her father took the phone. Samuel had never met Jenny's father, but based on a lifetime of experience, he expected the man to say that he was a bad influence, to tell him to never call again. Instead, the girl's father said this: "Would you like to come live with us?" Radical, self-giving, outward-focused love changed everything for that angry teenage boy. It cut through his anger as no lesser force could possibly have done, and it changed his life. I don't know whether Jenny's father acted from a place of Christian conviction, but I do know that he followed Jesus' pattern, Jesus' way of love. Your own acts of love might look very different, but they can have equal power. The struggles we face right now are not going to go away overnight. I wish they would. But we can know that we're not alone. We can remember our own stories, our own needs. We can remember the times that God has been with us. We can remember that God is with us still. And we can know that we do have some power to cut through the worst of what we face, to ease the anger, to set aside the fear. There's a lot going on right now. There's a lot going on. And so love one another as Christ loved us. Today, tomorrow, and the day after that, love one another for as long as it takes.